You are listening to Talking Images, the official podcast of icmforum.com. Welcome back to part 2 of our countdown, or shall I say, count up of our favorite films of 2017. In part 1, we discussed each of our individual 5th, 4th and 3rd favorite films of 2017 in detail, and even included 5 runner-ups. Now, it is time to jump into the top of the crop, revealing our 2nd favorite films of 2017 before we move on to the crown jewels of them all, ending this 2-parter on a bang. Though mind you, with quite a few disagreements along the way, because, as we mentioned in part 1, there are very few overlaps between our lists, and our tastes do vary. So, without any more ado, let's just get right into it, and just as we did in part 1, we can start with you, Matthieu. So, what is your 2nd favorite film of 2017?
Alright, so my pick for number 2 best film of 2017 is a film by David Lowery, which is a ghost story. The film is about a woman who's trying to cope with the sudden death of her husband, who seems to have become a ghost. I remember I saw the film in theater when it was released, and there is a scene toward the beginning of the film where we encounter the ghost for the first time, who's just a man, under a bed sheet, like on the poster of the movie. I remember that quite a few people were laughing when they saw that scene. Even though personally I didn't really find it funny, but I guess it was unexpected, and that's why. I also believe a lot of people walked out after a while, because I believe they were expecting some kind of horror film, and they were disappointed to see that it was not the case at all, but it was a very slow film instead. The film is extremely poetic, I would say, in lack of a better word. I think it's a beautiful description of having just something, let's say, sticking with you, that is always present, no matter where you are and what you're doing. Yeah. It's always there, but at the same time, it's slowly, I would say, fading away. And I think the film shows that extremely well by displaying this ghostly figure. That it's a very famous image of what a ghost usually looks like. That's what everyone does. As a kid, you just hide under a bed sheet, and boom, you're a ghost. And I thought it was very clever to have this very childlike image of ghost mixed with this very dark subject. The sudden death of a young husband. So I think overall the film is, as I said, a bit slow. Well, so some people describe it as extremely slow. I don't think it's the case at all. I think it's a bit slow, but honestly, there are way slower film than this. It's once again a film that is extremely poetic and quite unusual in its way. It's been seen by quite a few people, but maybe not appreciated enough, I think, for what it is. So hopefully it's a film that will be rediscovered a bit and talked a bit more in future years. Who knows?
Yeah, so A Ghost Story is also my number 2. And yeah, I also remember seeing people walk out of it in the theaters, now that you mention it. It's a hard film for me to talk about. It comes down to, I think, what differentiates films I like from films I love is often a sense of transcendence, of a film reaching something I couldn't quite express in any way, which is exactly why the medium of film is so valuable. Right? It can explore things that language or other forms of expression sometimes fail to. And yeah, this film very openly goes for that. And for me, it clearly succeeds. Anything I could say about this film in terms of theme would feel kind of trivial or pretentious, but and the film's only slight misstep is when it tries to put those ideas into actual words as a monologue at one point. I think it's much better when it's just content in making us like look at Rooney Mara eating pie for an eternity. So yeah, it's a film about time, about grief, about love, and about death, and nothing less than the meaning of existence. And its main character is Casey Affleck playing a ghost in a little sheet, which all sounds like a recipe for disaster, but Laurie somehow makes it work. And as much as I wish I would know what that somehow entails, I just don't. Is it the aspect ratio? Is it the mournful and affecting score? Or is it the precise way in which Laurie and his cinematographer, Andrew Palermo, organize each shot? Or is it the performances of Rooney Mara and Casey Affleck who provide this emotional grounding that allows the films to kind of wax lyrical and metaphysical about the passage of time? I don't know, but for me, it's a really profound experience and one I'd recommend to anyone.
So, in talking about a ghost story, I would like to say that I'm one of those people who walked out of the cinema, but I'm not. I didn't actually see it until it came out on DVD, and I didn't walk out of it. But I did find the first half of the film to be a bit of a chore. It is definitely very slow paced for a reason, but I guess I felt that it was lingering a lot on shots where nothing much was happening. I did really like the second half of the film, though, where it comes a bit of a mischievous poltergeist and listens to conversations about memory and wanders the streets at night, illuminated by bright signs and lights. I thought, those parts in the second half were really good. But the first half of the film really frustrated me. So I liked it overall with reservations. But it's definitely a film that in the months since seeing it has kept playing in the back of my mind, and I've kept going, well, maybe I did undervalue it. It has, like Matthieu said, got a really great moody music score. And I mean, the second half of the film worked so well for me, but I was so put off by the first half of it that I can definitely understand why people might have walked out of the cinema if they paid money to see it.
Well, I love a ghost story. It was on my top 10, obviously, and I think it just shows how strong a year 2017 was, that there are so many great films I couldn't include in my top 5. I think what works so well in a ghost story and what makes it in some ways one of the most striking films ever made is just the brutality of the sheet. When you have ghost stories, you usually have the real person. Maybe you make them transparent, maybe you make them look slightly dead, maybe they look exactly as they did, maybe you play around with the visuals a little bit, but here it's just a sheet. They put a sheet over his head, and that's like over his entire body, and that's it. It's so brutal. It's so minimalistic as well. It's so jarring. It's horrifying in a way. It's just so simple and plain and extreme, and it's just you just stare at him, and it's like looking into nothingness. Especially when he starts playing with time, and it really dives into this existentialism and this dread and this sadness and just how much emotion this sheet, this literal sheet, can actually invoke in you. I think it's an absolutely incredible accomplishment by Lowery, and I think it's beautiful, it's stunning, it's effective, it's a little bit surreal even, and I really agree that the narration probably took me to a little bit out of it. I think the visual aspect of it, and just again that sheet, is what really makes it stand out, makes it incredible, makes it so brutal, and ensures that it's a film I'll never ever forget.
Yeah, I think if I had known you, Chris, when I saw A Ghost Story, I would have definitely thought, oh yeah, he's going to love this, because the minimalism of the sheet is like catnip to you. So yeah, that makes sense.
So that's actually both Clem and Matthieu in one go. So Saul, what's your second favorite film of 2017?
So my second favorite of 2017 is a film that blew me away when I saw it in cinemas. And I recently rewatched it on DVD, which was interesting to sort of like process it, knowing where it was going to go, because the first time I saw it was just so amazingly unpredictable. The film is Three Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri, filmed by Martin McDonagh, who did in Bruges. And what the film is about, most people will know, but it's about a mother of a murdered teen who rents three billboards to renew public interest in her case and sort of gets some messages on there calling out the town sheriff. And it's a semi-spontaneous decision, almost spur of the moment, but it has lasting impacts on everyone around her. The film's a blend of comedy and drama, and when I viewed it for the second time, some of the mounting coincidences I found a bit hard to swallow, but then again, the film is about fate and chance. And as I said before in the 2018 podcast, I'm really into Coen Brothers style films, and this one does play around with fate and chance like a Coen Brothers movie. It's also got a grand Carter Burwell score and a stellar performance from Frances McDormand. So it feels like a Coen Brothers film. But besides for that, either way, it just works really well because we see the ramifications of her decision on everyone around her from all different perspectives. So it's not just her, it's also the sheriff who's got his own issues because he's got a terminal illness. It's about his deputies and how it affects them. And everybody in the film actually comes off as sympathetic and relatable by the end of the movie, which you don't really get in a lot of films. There's no clear cut good guys or bad guys. They're all just relatable human beings. And it ends in a way that's slightly uncomfortable, but it's intentionally so because there's all this uncertainty hanging in the air. And it's all about whether the characters will realize that anger just begets greater anger. It's a great quote from the film. And whether they'll learn from their experiences or whether the situation is doomed to spiral even further and further out of control. So, I mean, that really sums up the film for me. It's this semi-spontaneous decision which has these great ramifications, and then by the end of it, you're just not sure there's going to be more ramifications, whether the characters will finally learn to control all their anger.
Yeah, I think that's a really good summary of the film soul. I absolutely agree. It has Coen brother vibes through the roof. Frances McDormand is incredible in it, as is Sam Rockwell and Woody Harrelson. And I think what to bring out here with the fact that everyone's so relatable, especially by the end, that you have so much empathy and sympathy for each character. In this tale, there's so much hatred and anger as well. I think it's an incredible achievement, and you also have this black comedic elements that just work so well throughout. So it's definitely a very strong film, though, like you mentioned, coincidences, some of the other elements of the film do make it a little bit lighter for me. It's not one of my very favorite films of the year, but it's definitely one I'm happy to recommend.
Yeah, Three Billboards is a film I like a lot. And I think one essential thing about it is that it's essentially a film about redemption, and it comes from an Irish filmmaker, which means that he's someone, I don't know if he's Catholic, Martin McDonagh, but he definitely grew up in a society where Catholicism is quite central. And I think you really see that in his film, at least I do, having grown up Catholic myself. And this idea of redemption, which is so central in Catholicism, that no matter what you've done, redemption or grace should be given to you. I think that's what the film really is all about. And you mentioned that kind of uncomfortable ending, Saul. And yeah, I think the ending is great for that reason, is we are not comfortable with the fact that some of these characters may or may not be granted redemption. And essentially that's the whole film is just leading up to that, is kind of questioning that notion in a way that is humanistic and also entertaining along the way. I think it's a great film.
It's really great to hear these positive takes on the film from both of you, because I know when the film came out, it got quite a bit of backlash for some of its portrayal of domestic violence and for apparently promoting vigilantism. But rewatching the film, I looked at it, and the domestic violence scene in question lasts less than 2 minutes. And the film isn't really pro vigilante unless you actually miss the whole message of the entire film. So it was just really interesting rewatching the film. Sort of confirmed in my mind that no, those people were ridiculous, and it shouldn't have really got the hate that it received or the backlash it received after it ended up winning the Golden Globe for Best Picture.
Well, I wouldn't go so far. I get why people reacted so poorly to this film and why it was so controversial. Because I think you can see the film being a bit soft towards these characters. I don't personally see it that way, but I can definitely see how you can think that Sam Rockwell's character in particular is kind of being excused by the film. I think, again, that's to me, that's what the film is about. But I think I understand why people had this very negative reaction. And when it comes to award season, those kind of things are always blown up 1,000 times, right? So the discourse gets even worse.
Yeah, no, that's probably a good point, Matthew. If the film wasn't one of these big ones in award seasons, it would probably be something that would just like shied over and forgotten. But since everybody kept touting it as one of the best films of the year, I think that kind of aggravated some of the people who, yeah, I mean, I can see why they'd get annoyed about that 2 minute scene of domestic violence. I can understand why they'd get annoyed with the way their Sam Rockwell character arc is handled. I can understand that, but yeah, I think I agree. It's just being blown out of proportion, and unfortunately so. But look, the film's still quite highly acclaimed. It's still in the IMDb top 250. It didn't need to win the Best Picture Oscar. It didn't need to get a Best Director Oscar nomination to still be remembered as one of the year's most powerful films.
So my runner-up for favorite film of 2017 would probably be my favorite film from most years this past decade, and it's Faces Places by Agnes Varda, and for the first time with a co-director, the younger artist JR. And what I really love here, and what comes out even more on the rewatches, is how all-encompassing and multi-layered this film is. I mean, the easy summary is simply Varda and JR, an easy pair with a 50-year gap between them. She's 88 and he's in his early 30s, just hitting the road on a mission to capture faces and places across France. Just finding people, taking their picture, blowing them up and putting them on walls, barns, trains, you name it. And just this aspect of it alone is beautiful, especially in how they do it, because they visit these marginalized communities, such as the disappearing mining town, striking dock workers. They meet hardworking farmers, and there's so many everyday people, which they then bring to life on the camera. But in traditional Varda fashion, it's also the story of the creation of this project. The act of creating images, of discussing the project, of discussing the people they meet, and simply the act of filming and taking pictures of the event itself. I mean, it all becomes the film. It all becomes a central narrative, which at any point over the last decade would be great, and is in and of itself. But then you also have this sense of Agnes Varda aging, being more frail, losing her sight. Perhaps it wouldn't be if she made one more film, but perhaps being her last and final project. And this sense of perspective and intimacy really elevates the film. And Varda, in so many ways, is not only the filmmaker, but a large part of the emotional core. I mean, it's essentially a story of vitality and never-ending creativity of this, at this point, 80-year-old woman with blurry vision and a cane, just still striving to do more, to create more. And then you have this almost invisible narrative which slowly sneaks up on you with a very strong and powerful emotional climax. It's warm, playful, creative, and just really illuminates the joy and necessity and of creation, and people living and breathing creation. And it's just such a wonderful and fantastic near masterpiece to me.
While I wouldn't go that far, I did quite like Visage Village or Faces Places. If Les Plages d'Agnès or The Beaches of Agnes was her autobiography in some sense, this felt to me like her testament. I guess I haven't seen Varda par Agnès, the last film she actually managed to get out before recently dying. But yeah, this felt like a very fitting final film if it had to be. It has all of her joyous personality, and yeah, I think she bounces very well out of GR, and her also creativity, endless creativity. She started as a photographer, and so this kind of project makes a lot of sense. And yeah, I'm not as enamored with it. I think just generally the post-2000s Agnès Varda documentaries are all like, I don't necessarily love any of them, but they're all very, very endearing, in part because Varda herself is just this very unique and great personality. And that really comes to in these films. So yeah, I like this one, not as much as you, but it's definitely a fitting end or almost end to her career.
It's interesting to hear Matthieu describe Faces Places as being a fitting end to Varda's career, because I'm not really able to look at it through that lens. It's Faces Places is actually the only documentary that I've seen by Varda, unless you include Lion's Love, which is sort of part documentary. Varda plays a bit of a role in there. But yeah, it's the only straightforward, definite documentary that I've seen. The others, for whatever reason, have never really been on my radar. So going into the film, I really like the concept of it. I like JR's art and blowing up individuals and putting their photos on different walls. I thought that was extremely interesting. And what I found disappointing is that the film wasn't really about that. There was like even more of a subplot, because a lot of it, I think, like Chris said, is about them going around and interacting with the people, this being part of the documentary. So you get this documentary, which is, meant to be about this artwork, but instead you get all these deflections to goat milking and other activities. And I'm sort of watching it going, yeah, I'd like you to actually get back to the artwork. I guess a couple of other things which vexed me slightly about it is there's a bit of a sense of artifice to it. There's this part where they try and recreate the Louvre run from Band of Outsiders by running through the art gallery, but the way that it's shot together and the shots are cut together, it's clearly been artificial and shot 3 or 4 different times from different angles and put together. So I sort of was made a bit too maybe aware of the artifice of it. It didn't really feel spontaneous for me. And then the film sort of goes off towards the end and sort of deflects to being about Jean-Luc Godard, which I think was meant to be an organic deflection, but I guess the way that it was built around, that some of the Godard stuff that gets dropped in at the beginning of the film, it just felt for me like maybe a bit of an artificial plot turn. And I didn't really like the fact that they kept going on about Godard and he wasn't interviewed, apparently because he didn't want to be in it, but he wasn't interviewed, so you don't really get him to do his side of the picture. So that was just really strange to me. But whenever the film was focusing on the photographs, blowing them up, putting them up places, the way they looked with all these people up there, there's this magnificent one with these shipping containers and these women sort of coming out of themselves in the shipping containers. That was amazing. And I just wish there was more of that and less of the goat milking and let's pretend to spontaneously recreate stuff from Band of Outsiders.
Yeah, I guess I quite enjoy the digressive nature, the tangential, right? How we keep moving on to other stuff. It didn't feel artificial to me. It felt like just like how Varda works in general. I think maybe having seen more documentaries helps with that. Just having more of a sense of familiarity with her, I suppose.
Oh yeah, I agree with that, and I think it's also what you expect and what you think the film will be, because it's why that it's never that simple. Even in something like The Cleaner's Eye, it takes it really blends together anything you think about Gleaners, strikes it into a larger social context, and then also makes it about Varda and how she might glean. So she always works herself into her documentaries, and it's especially here, I think since it's about creation, to me, the fact that they are creating these scenes and recreating these scenes, there's no artificiality about it, because that is just the act of creation. That just works, just part of the core. But then it's like Sol said, it's about what you want from the film and what you're going in there for. If you're going in there specifically for these faces and these places and this specific art, then I can definitely see why you would be disappointed. But if you are more inclined to the diversion of art, which are always there, and just the acts of creation and these types of meta narratives, then it is then it will definitely be for you. And as Matthieu joked during the recording, it is kind of like a thriller, not quite, but like it has these elements, it has twists, it has turns, it takes you for a ride. It's such a strong narrative as well. So it's there's so many things to appreciate and love about this film, but it does so much that if you're only interested in some of the things it does, it may not work.
Okay, well, I deeply regret now not seeing more Vada documentaries before sitting down to watch Faces Places, because like what you've described there, I think if I had more of a background and knew more of what she was going for, I think I would have possibly been able to appreciate it a bit more.
Oh, I definitely recommend it, especially The Beaches of Agnes, which is in a very similar vein, but also even more personal. But on that note, I think we're actually all the way up to our favorite films. Finally, we're here. And once again, Clem, take it away. What is your favorite film of 2017?
Okay, so number one for me of 2017 is an Estonian film by Rainer Sarnet, and the movie is called November. The film is about a love story, I would say, that is set in a small Estonian village during the winter. It's a place where peculiar things happen, let's say, filled with magic. Let's call it this way. You can make a deal with the devil to get animated objects that can work for you, that you can build out of things that you find around your house. There are also the dead that comes to visit you sometimes, and you have to give them food and prepare a sauna for them. And as I said, the film is centered around this love story. It's a very simple love story. There is this girl, Lina, who loves Ernst, but Ernst doesn't love her. He loves a German baroness, actually. So it's a story that has been, told a million times before in all shape or forms. But this film has something special, and firstly, it has absolutely breathtaking black and white cinematography. It's absolutely gorgeous to look at. I was just glued to the screen the entire 2 hours, just looking at how incredibly beautiful the film looked, whether it's shot during daytime with this snow all over the place, images filled with light, or if it's shot during nighttime with the moonlight or fire and torches and everything. It just gives it an incredible look. I think, once again, it's a story that has been told a few times, but this film manages to mix those fantasy elements I mentioned and some others I won't talk about, not to spoil it. This element manages to keep the film extremely original, extremely surprising. As I say, I couldn't take my eyes away from it, and it's just a film that is incredibly beautiful to look at. There is this feeling of just almost like it's happening in another world, because they're just so cut from everything. It's just something that is happening in their own small world in its own. And I just think it's a folk fantasy film, I would say, that features a love story that just kept me just hooked from beginning to end. And I recently rewatched it for this podcast a few days ago, but I just can't wait to rewatch it again because I think it's definitely one of the highlights of the decade for me.
So this film I watched for this podcast, and I went into it with a bit of trepidation because it's an Estonian black and white film. I presumed it would be about World War II in some way, and I expected something a bit dour. And the first scene is this scene of a kind of demon made of agricultural objects that kind of kidnaps a cow. And so, that was right away, I was kind of into the film. And this concept of the krat, I think they call it, that those kind of demons made by pact with the devil, with the peasants trying to cheat the devil. That's a concept that is quite central to the film, actually, and that works quite well. And the film has a bit of a sense of humor about it, which I think is greatly welcome. Clem mentioned amazing cinematography. That's obviously the biggest selling point for this film. It's gorgeous. There's no other way to say it. I think it works narratively mostly. The center of the story is this love triangle. And I think that works quite well as kind of a tragic, romantic love story. Unlike what the Letterboxd summary says, this takes place in the 19th century. And so it feels very much like a story from the 19th century, like kind of reclaiming those old folk legends, kind of in a spirit of nationalism. And reclaiming that folk history and reinterpreting it. And it has that romantic energy again with that love triangle at the center. So I think it works quite well. Again, it's mostly a visual delight. The narrative is a bit jumbled at times. I think the film maybe attempts a little too much narratively. There are a lot of different strains, and they're not all followed through as much as one would like them to. But for me, it mostly works, and the mood of it is just one I appreciate it a lot.
Yeah, I'll agree on one thing, which is that this is just a visual feast. It's beautiful. The black and white cinematography is almost expressionistic. It's incredible to look at and spellbinding. And the only reason why I cannot be as positive as you are is that there was just this extremely awkward disconnect with how it was shot and what it was presenting and the general tone, because you do have this beauty, but then you have this ridiculous silliness almost, and it doesn't really play as a comedy. If it played as a comedy, I would have probably liked it better. But like you mentioned, this like mechanical assembly picking up a cow, it looks so ludicrous. It's ripe for laugh, but then it really isn't a comedy. It has these kind of childlike or bizarre jokes throughout, and they don't really hit home for me. It looks so ludicrous and silly that, in contrast with the visual beauty, that it just doesn't work. There's a complete and utter disconnect for me that just made the film fall apart a little bit. I still liked it. I think it's strong enough visually to like be good almost no matter what it did, but that's just I cannot say it's the overly good film, and it's certainly far from being on my list of the best films of the year. So sorry about that.
Like Matthieu, I watched November specifically for the podcast. And like Chris, I did find the tone in it wavering a little bit. And everybody's been talking about it so far, so I'm going to say it also. Just that initial scene with the creature called a krat, I believe. The krat lifting up the cow and kidnapping it, sort of, and dropping it down. I thought that was amazingly offbeat and weird, and I was like, wow, this is going to be such a cool film. I almost paused the movie and jumped onto Discord to message Clem and say, wow, this is such a crazy, WTF film. But I ended up being more of a film purist and just stuck with it and watched the entire thing. And what was sad for me is that after that great beginning, nothing else to come is ever quite as quirky or as kooky as that. Like Matthieu said, there is quite a strong love triangle, which takes up most of the plot there. but that never really interested me. I didn't find the characters or, their pining for each other interesting at all. I did find the cheating of the Black Death to be quite intriguing, especially with some of the ways they did it. I mean, there's a part where they're dressed up with like cloaks on and they're exposing their naked rear ends to try and trick the Death. That was kind of interesting, but there wasn't a lot of quirkiness like it. For the most part, yeah, I just thought it was mainly about the unrequited love and the underhanded trading and the magic and the spells. I don't know. None of it was ever as interesting for me as the Krat. And we do see the Krat later on moving about a little. And I would have absolutely loved to see a film totally about the Krats because, as Chris says, it's amazing, ridiculous type of thing. And I just would have loved that. And I suppose after the introduction and with the rest of it being a little bit more serious, I suppose the film was just a mild disappointment for me.
Okay. Yeah, I understand. I definitely understand what you guys mean, and yeah, absolutely. The introduction scene is very original to say the least. I understand what you mean, Chris, when you say that maybe the comedy elements maybe took you off a bit from the film and made a contrast with what you were looking at, because I usually exactly the same about when there is like this contrast between beautiful images and comic elements that don't really belong here. In the case of the film, though, I didn't really spotted any comic elements. Maybe I don't know because because I don't have a sense of humor. I don't. But there's only one that I picked up that made me laugh. A dialogue between the main character Lena and a man who she's supposed to marry because her father promised it to him when he was drunk. Apart from that, there are a few elements that I could see work out as a comedy, but once again, I don't think these elements were funny enough to distract me from the rest of the film. And Soul, a film dedicated to the Krat, I guess that's how they call them, would indeed be really really good to see. So yeah, I would definitely love to see like a side film featuring those animated creatures. That would be something I would enjoy seeing.
I do think the film wants to be comedic at times. I definitely do feel that way. And while I don't think the disconnect is as strong as Chris felt it, it definitely kind of jumps back and forth between the two. I do think you guys are understanding how much the Krats are in the movie, though, because there's not only the one that kidnaps the cow, which we see a few more times. There's also the one that's a snowman and who turns into like some kind of a Cyrano figure, helping out the guy seduce the Baroness. I don't know. I thought the film already kind of explored that concept a bit.
Yeah, no, there were other Krats in there. I mean, I agree with that. I just wish the Krat was the main character. And I'm going to butcher the name, but if we wanted more recommendations for a film with creatures like that, or stop motion animated, you just see the films of Jans Funkmajer, who did Alice and Conspirators of Pleasure and Lunacy and some other films like that, as well as a whole ton of short stop animated films.
Yeah, I definitely love. I don't know either how it's pronounced, but yeah, I haven't seen much of his feature films, but I definitely love his short films, and I definitely see someone enjoying his short film. I could definitely see him enjoying November as well.
So, Matthieu, what's your favorite film of 2017?
Well, my favorite is a sequel to a sci-fi classic I don't actually like all that much, and that's Blade Runner 2049. Villeneuve retained the design and the aesthetic of the original, which I would argue were the film's strongest points, but added an actual protagonist we can care about. I love the way this film deconstructs and recontextualizes the notion of the chosen one with the arc that Ryan Gosling's characters go through. What makes you a hero if not believing that you can be one, and how we can deceive ourselves into actually finding purpose and meaning. And Gosling is giving a typically quiet and reserved performance, which works very well for a non-human character we can project ourselves onto to a certain extent. And we get two excellent supporting roles, both different types of femme fatale, right? Because this keeps the noir roots of the original film. You have Ana de Armas, who's the one who kind of ropes our protagonists into the story, like it often happens in noir, in a way that he can't resist, even when he knows he's being manipulated, because she's literally a computer, so not too hard to figure it out. And Sylvia Hughes as more of a pulpy, like kind of James Bond type evil woman. And that's another quality of the film, that it manages to be both an introspective and thoughtful piece of sci-fi, looking at identity, which is what great sci-fi can do, while also being this pulpy and entertaining mystery thriller with action scenes that don't feel like something we've seen 100 times before. This balance is so hard to manage, and I think this film is one of the best examples of it. It even manages to tie itself with the original film in ways that mostly work, and even weaponize Jared Leto's obnoxiousness into something that actually serves the film. It's visually impeccable as well, with the standout actually being sex scenes of sorts, which explores the evergreen theme of identity, as I alluded to, in a creative visual manner. Roger Deakins' cinematography is as gorgeous as you'd expect from him, particularly using the Nevada desert for some pretty stunning shots. And yeah, so it's a great film. The only film I think I saw twice in theaters that year. And yeah, definitely my favorite.
Blade Runner 2049 is a film that I had avoided for a long time because, like Matthieu, I'm not a big fan of the original. When I heard that we were going to be featuring this film on the podcast, I decided, okay, I'm going to have to finally rewatch the original and then rewatch this one. And not only Matthieu, but also Tom, who isn't participating with us this week, had told me the Blade Runner sequel is better than the original. It doesn't really matter if you didn't like the original that much, you still might like the sequel more. So I thought, okay, we'll see what happens. So I rewatched the original Blade Runner and came out with pretty much the same opinion on it, that it was a well done film, great visuals, but not really well paced and not really with a very great lead character. So I thought, okay, there's a bit to work on here. We'll see what the sequel does with it. So the sequel is visually stunning. It probably ups the ante on it then. Like Matthieu said, it's just really stunning what Roger Deakins has managed to do. Well, not only just the Nevada desert, but the whole color scheme of the film and all the newfangled sets. It's a beautiful film to look at. But on the same account, while upping the visuals of the original, it also slows down the pace of the original because the sequel goes on for almost 3 hours. And the slower pace, I don't feel really added to the film that much. I did like the reversal of the original's dynamics. So the original is about, Harrison Ford coming to terms with the fact that, okay, well, maybe he is a robot. And over here, we've got Ryan Gosling character thinking, oh, okay, well, maybe my memories aren't actually implants. So it's a bit of a reversal in there, which is kind of interesting. But I didn't find it was interesting enough to make up for the slow pace where there wasn't really a lot happening. It's sort of like Deakins created this great universe and the filmmakers really wanted to indulge it and show it off as much as possible. But by showing off all these visual vistas, the core of the story really gets dragged out to the point where there's no real urgency except when a character pops up towards the end. And yeah, look, I guess overall, there are some interesting identity messages in there. I don't think it took the material in any directions more than the original did. And while the original is a film who I think's reputation exceeds its worth, I'd say the same thing about the sequel. I wouldn't place it in my top 20 or 30 films of 2017. And I'm probably even a little bit mystified by all the positive reception because slow-paced films like this don't usually go down that well. So, yeah, it's more intriguing, I guess, for me than anything else that the sequel is so highly regarded.
So I'm going to say that I really did like the slow nature of it. It's and how visually stunning it was. It's just really well executed. It's just really well executed. I like how it played with the original without really being, the most direct follow-up you ever could be. The main problem for me with this film is just that the bad guys in it, the story there, the conventions there are just silly and thin. Is the most stereotypical villain you could possibly imagine, and it really drags down the rest of the film, which does some really great things with visuals, some really good things with action, and manages to once again play with our expectations. So I think it's I would probably call it a great film, but it's not one of the best films of 2017. And just like with November, the main saving grace here is really the visuals, which are just stunning and utterly beautiful.
Yes, I agree with everyone that the visuals did extremely beautiful to look at. It's definitely one of the main positive elements about this film. I have to say I quite liked the first Blade Runner. I think it's interesting to see the contrast there is between, visually speaking, I mean the original and this one, because from what I remember in the original, the atmosphere is way darker. Let's say it looks darker than this one, the sequel. I mean, which has this almost bright colors at some points. It's a film I did like. The story is interesting to follow, and once again, it looks extremely nice. But something was missing for me to fully enjoy it. It's a slow film, but it features few action scenes here and there, so it's not honestly that slow compared to other films. And yeah, it's a fun film definitely, but something is missing for me to truly appreciate it.
Yeah, I guess the pulpy elements are what you didn't like, Chris, and I think also what explained the success so compared to other films that are similarly based. And yeah, again, I think it's that blending that I love. That kind of philosophical sci-fi along with the pulpy genre stuff. And I think that's something that I particularly enjoy more than maybe you guys. Both aspects, and so that's why I responded to it much more strongly.
That's a really, really good point as well. The way it merges these styles, I can definitely see why you would love it. So, Saul, what's your favorite film of 2017?
Earlier on, when I talked about the death of Stalin, I mentioned that it was one of only two films from 2017 that I've seen 3 times. And this next film is the other film that I've seen 3 times. When I first went to see it in cinemas, I knew very little about it. The different trailer spots that had come up and different ads on IMDb made it look very, whatever. But I was told by some people on the ICM forum, if you're into horror, you really need to check it out. So I'm like, okay, I'll go along. The film was, of course, Get Out. And seeing it during its theatrical run before it won the Oscar for original screenplay and everything, it was just an absolutely mind-blowing experience. I had not seen such a well done, stylistically and thought-provoking horror film in the cinemas for quite some time, and I was quite curious about how it would stack up to revision. So I think the following year, during the horror challenge on the forum, I rewatched it and I liked it even more. And I decided, look, I'll rewatch it for this podcast. And when I did, it actually displaced 3 billboards to now become my number 1 film of 2017. What a lot of people seem to really like about Get Out is the racial elements, and there is a lot of racial satire in there, and about relations between black and white, and about some of the tension going on there, especially if you're the only black person in the room. But what I really like about the film is that it's a bit of a horror twist on Meet the Parents. And you get there and you're unsure if the girlfriend's parents are acting strange and their friends are acting strange, or whether it's just in your imagination. He's so nervous to meet them. And, Daniel Kaluuya just gives an amazing performance in it. And you just not really sure, is it an overactive imagination or are they really behaving in a bizarre sort of way? And I think one of the signature films that influenced it is Eyes Wide Shut. And there's even a pun in the film that references that. And it's the same sort of idea with like Tom Cruise wandering into, the secret society and, not sure afterwards how much you really imagine and how much is real. The same sort of ideas are played around with Get Out, and that's even before you're getting it to be a horror film, because the actual overt horror doesn't really happen until the second part of the film. And then when the overt horror does have, it's just such a lovely throwback to the horror films of the 70s and 80s, with some of the furniture in there, some of the directors like Cronenberg, who are referenced with some of the plot turns and some of the way different parts of it are set up. It's just an amazing experience. And in addition to being such an atmospheric horror film, it's also really laugh out loud funny at certain points. I mean, actually got a Golden Globe nomination for Best Comedy, but we all know the Golden Globes are a bit funny with the categories there. But there are some really funny parts there, and the film balances humor and drama so well, and I'm really big on films that are able to do that. And Get Out is just such a great combination of horror, comedy, drama, all of these different elements blend together. It's such a thrilling experience. So amazing at rewatching it a couple of nights ago in the dead of night in my house with all the lights turned off. Just that intro scene with Lakeith Stanfield and being mugged in the middle of the night. Just an amazing setup for an amazing film that Chris might not really like too much, but hopefully my other fellow co-hosts do. It's a film that really does something, and then the more that you watch and up to 3 viewings now, the more dynamic it seems to be.
Yeah, I guess I don't have that much to add. Get Out is a massively acclaimed film, and I agree with all the acclaim. It's very funny. It works quite well as a thriller / horror film. The satirical or the political elements are quite well observed and well woven into the story. And Daniel Kaluuya is a great actor. I'm curious to rewatch it actually because I've come to appreciate him more since. I thought he was good in Get Out, but I really liked him in other things, and now I'm curious to see if his performance is something I would react to even better now. But yeah, it's kind of a very efficient film, and I do love that. But I guess I don't have that much specific to add.
Yeah, I think Get Out is probably a smarter film than it is great. I only like the film. I really think it's well written. It's a very intelligent work where you can really see Jordan Peele tie in all of these subtle hints and references and make it all go together. And I can also see these references coming out to play, on the rewatch as well. It's so the writing is in terms of just allusions and creativity and hints is spot on, but the actual direction to me felt a little bit like the direction of a TV episode. It's well done, but it was never visually striking. I think that the airiness is there and it works, but so many others have done that as well. So I never saw it, aside from obviously the core concept, it never really hit me as that unique. It's a good film. The elements of it work relatively well. I think the horror works relatively well, but it's not really the type of film that I generally love, I suppose.
Okay, so Get Out is a film that didn't really work for me. I can appreciate the fact that the filmmaker tried to have this different element mixed all together in the film to create something different, let's say. The problem is that individually the comedy elements didn't really spoke to me. The horror elements are usually not the type of horror I'm really attracted to be fair. And yeah, I don't know, the film altogether. Once again, I can appreciate the effort, especially as a first film. It's an impressive feature, but something just didn't click with me with the film, and since neither the horror or the comedy really worked, I wasn't left with much to enjoy. There is a social commentary, let's say, surrounding it, which is there, but I feel like it's treated in a way that is not very original either. So I couldn't really relate to that either. So yeah, sorry, Saul, but I guess this film is not. Guess the film is not for me. Maybe I will watch it in a few years and see if my opinion has changed, because I saw the other film by the director, which was released in 2019, I believe, The Us, which I like. So maybe eventually, as I see more film from him, maybe I'll rewatch Get Out and get more from it than I did the first time.
And I think you also hit on something that didn't quite work for me there, in that the blend of comedy and horror, it did kind of take a little bit away from each other, and it even reminded me a little bit of Kevin Smith's horror films like Tusk in a similar way, which is just the mix didn't quite work, even though there's individual elements that are still striking. So I think that's a good summary.
Okay, interesting to hear all of you guys react to Get Out, because you've all had very different reactions to it. Matthieu, in terms of Daniel Kaluuya, he's an actor who, likewise, I've become very impressed with since Get Out. I didn't actually think too much of his performance at the time when I saw it in cinemas, and when he started to get, SAG nominations and Golden Globe nominations for Best Actor, I thought, well, that's odd, because it wasn't the most striking part of the film. But when I rewatched Get Out and saw just the different ways he reacts to different things, it's more of a subtle and toned down performance, but he carries it really well. And for a couple of other really great performances for him, I can look for Widows, the Steve McQueen film. He plays quite an aggressive antagonist in there, and it's really interesting to see him take on a different sort of role. And for something similar, Queen and Slim, he is very effective in that. I think I actually mentioned Queen and Slim in our 2019 podcast. And of course, the other one is the film. Daniel Kaluuya has actually won the Oscar for Judas and the Black Messiah. He's very good on that. Not as good as Lakeith Stanfield, but he is really good at it. Just mentioning just with what Chris and Clem has said about the film and about the comedy in there, I actually do like Kevin Smith's horror films. They're my favorite Kevin Smith films. Tusk does get a bit silly towards the end, but then the actual ending of it is so tragic, and I think generally the comedy is blended well in Tusk, and even Yoga Hoses and Red State, I like them quite a lot as well. Comedy, though, is always going to be in the eye, or I guess the ear, or whatever, the beholder. So I guess if it didn't work for you guys, I can't really argue too much about it. I just thought it was incredibly well timed, and having the comic relief in there, I guess, sort of helped out, because otherwise it's an extremely grim tale when you try and work out, what's happening to all these characters in there. It's extremely grim. So like having the scene at the police station where Shakur's and the other officers and they all laugh at his friend or whatever just completely lightens the tone in a way that, I don't know, for me at least it worked. And I guess the whole thing is just so outrageous what is actually going on, and having a little bit of black humor in there also helped. I don't know. I have seen Us, which Clem mentioned. I didn't like it anywhere near as much as Get Out, but I've only seen it once. The thing about Us is that it's got a very complex mythology, which I don't think is balanced particularly well. So I guess it's a bit more original than Get Out, because Clem said that Get Out wasn't too original. So it's a bit more creative and a bit more different. But I guess with Get Out, it's a bit more down to earth for me. Like this sort of thing could, possibly happen with the right sci-fi technology, whereas with Us, it's just completely out there. But I'd still say it's fairly original. I haven't really seen anything quite like that, so it does strike me as quite original. And it just breaks my heart for Chris to say that he didn't think that Get Out was well directed and never visually striking, because it's got so many great visual parts in it for me, from the opening scenes of Lakeith Stanfield being, mugged in the middle of the night, to that scene where the deer runs across the screen and shutters the mirror on their car, to just the way the house is seen from the distance. And then probably most particularly the hypnotism scene. That's just amazingly well done for me, and the way he slowly sinks into the sunken place. just as an incredible visual film. That whole falling down to black space has actually been mimicked in many music videos since. So I think the style's actually been influential, and I think it's an incredibly visual film. And I just think it's an amazing film to look at. It's amazing to listen to. But look, the film's actually in my all-time top 50 now, so I do think very highly of it. But look, I understand it's not a film for everyone.
I want to agree with you on the direction. It's not super flashy, but I do think there are some standouts, like you mentioned, and also I think the direction in managing to blend the tones. I guess it makes sense that Chris didn't think as highly of the direction because he had an issue with the tones. And yeah, you and I would argue that the comedy and the horror complements themselves quite well, and that's due to the directing. So yeah, you guys wanted Michael Haneke's Get Out, I guess, but I like Jordan Peele's better, I think.
Yes, if Haneke had made this, or if Peele had made it as a Haneke film, this would probably have been a favorite of mine. But to get to my actual favorite film of 2017, it may surprise you that it is a little warmer, if not a lot warmer, and it is Summer 1993 by Carla Simone. And I think very few, if any, other films have managed to not only capture childhood, but the experience, I think the actual visceral feeling of being a child better. This is not a traditional narrative, but a sensory experience, which is something I use for quite a lot of my favorite films, and something that works really well for me. That there's very little dialogue and only slow, fluid exposition where characters, history, and emotion gradually reveals itself and themselves. There is a sense of disorientation, but also play and innocence as a young girl settles into a new life with her aunt and uncle. We have great longer takes and scenes that simply grounds us in the play, that grounds us in actual childhood, and this slowly builds up our sense of familiar bonds and relationships. And this almost unique but instantly engaging form of storytelling, at least to me, succeeds in every way. We are with her, we feel what she feels, and we are as detached from her surroundings as she is. There is this fluid minimalism, and I'm not sure if there's a better term than that, which almost makes it seem like these are memories running before our eyes, memories of a summer in 1993 in Catalonia. And it just has this incredible level of intimacy. And, contrary to so many of my other entries in my top 10 of this year, it never feels stoic or cold. The minimalism is actually wonderfully warm, and it's filled with color and wonder. It's just an amazing way to approach characters and relationships. And it's also just incredible to think that this is Simon's first feature. I just love this film. I can't wait to see what Carla Simone will do next. I think she could easily be one of our generation's best directors, but obviously we shouldn't get our hopes up after a debut, that we get burnt by that quite often.
I like Summer of 1993 a lot. And I think part of the reason why I liked it so much is that it reminded me a lot of my second favorite film, Fanny Alexander. And it's not quite like that, but it is sort of, if I can try and explain it. So the whole film is about the girl coming of age and getting used to a new environment, but it's also about her reacting to the new relatives who she's living with. And, part of it's about, her squaring off with her new adoptive mother, and she's got this whole thing about not wanting to tie a shoelace, and there's this amazing scene where she manages to convince the grandfather to do up a shoelace, and the glare that she gives her aunt, her stepmother, as her shoelace is getting done up, is to say, yeah, like I've managed to, convince my grandfather to do it. It's a bit of rebellion, sort of similar to like how in Fanny Alexander has to rebel against the bishop. I guess the key difference, though, is that in Summer 1993, she's only really imagining the antagonism. in Fanny Alexander, there actually really is antagonism in there to a degree. I don't know. I mean, the bishop isn't really an evil character, he's just misguided. But the bishop is actually treating the children poorly. There's no question about that. In Summer 1993, the aunt isn't treating her poorly, but she's perceiving that as part of the confusion. And I thought that was worked in really well. And then she's got a younger cousin, and the dynamics with the younger cousin are also similar. A whole lot of confusion in there. Is she jealous of the cousin? Does she like having her around? She seems to sometimes like playing with her, but then she starts feeling jealous of her and wants her to just shut up. She tries to get her cousin lost in the woods. So a whole lot of it's about, her trying to fit into this new situation. And I thought that was really well conveyed, and it just conveys so well the sort of negativity that I guess she sort of feels because of the environment and the change of environment, and she's going to naturally rebel against it. But then, of course, over the course of the film, that changes a little bit, and I don't really want to spoil it too much, but it does progress quite interesting there. Either way, it's got an amazing central performance by its lead actress in there. And look, I was engaged the entire way through with the film, and I would thoroughly recommend it.
Yeah, Summer 93 is a film I enjoyed. I enjoyed the naturalism of it. I think it's a very smartly written film, especially in the way it handles the adoptive mother character, because it would be so easy to turn the film into a conflict between the mother who starts, the adoptive mother who starts to mistrust the child because it's a very difficult situation to deal with. And the film doesn't do that. It lets the character be complex and kind of even contradictory, like people are. And I think another strength of the film is the ending. I guess I'm not going to spoil it, but I think the ending is a bit of a release of something that's been bubbling under the film. Well, not even under. I mean, it's clearly the subject of the film for the whole way through. And I think that's dealt with rather well. I'm not sure why I didn't respond to as strongly as you guys, but it's a film I like. And I think it's interesting that both Chris and I have a film that's very much about summer and very much like we both highlight how it feeds like summer, and that's a high point for both of us, for Call Me By Your Name and this one.
Exactly, summer 1993 and summer 1983.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And I mean, Clem has Laissez bronzer les cadavres, that's summer. Not a fun summer, but still summer. I guess Saul just hates summer.
Oh, I don't know if I'd say I hate summer, but I think you can do more interesting things with the darkness that comes with winter.
And you live in Australia, so I can understand why you would like summer.
There you go.
Yeah, it's summer year.
Summer is all used up.
Yeah, so 2017, no summer in Australia, as we all know.
Well, okay, so it's a film I liked as well, to be honest. I think it's an interesting story because there is this contrast between, well, as you guys mentioned already, it's summer, so it's obviously very present, and it's usually a period of time when you're a child that you like, because you don't have to go to school, you go to holidays, your grandparents' house or whatever, or you travel. So it's always a period that is, well, usually filled with good memories. In this case, though, it's, well, the main protagonist, the little girl, is not having a good summer at all because of what happened, her mother passing away, and having to live with relatives. So I thought it was interesting to see once again the contrast between the period of the year and what she was facing. I was a bit scared before watching it. I was afraid that she would be, this hysterical child, just making a mess and making the situation very hard. And to be fair, she does a bit, but not that much. And I think the film was quite enjoyable to watch because of that.
If I can add just about the summer thing, just a small note that's not about Summer 93. If you guys want a film about the feeling of summer, there's a film that's literally called This Summer Feeling, Ce sentiment de l'été, which I would really recommend. It's a film that takes place over a few summers in Berlin, Paris, and New York, and it's quite dramatic, but all in that again feeling of summer that we talked about. So yeah, I would strongly recommend it. I think Chris, especially, you would like it.
Excellent. Is this will this be on your top list for 2015?
No, I don't. I mean, I would have to look it up, but I think it would be a bit lower. So,
all right, fair enough. But I'll give it viewing. And on other summer films, obviously, I obviously have to recommend all of Eric Romer's fantastic summer films, especially The Green Ray. To everyone except Saul, essentially, who really hates summer.
I don't hate summer. It's less cinematic than winter, but I don't hate summer.
But and on that lovely note, thank you all for listening, and join us again soon. You have been listening to Talking Images, the official podcast of icmforum.com.